There is a blank area on my digital topo map covering a large area of Banff National Park. This group of 3,000 plus meter peaks are bounded by the Clearwater River to the north, Roaring Creek to the west, and McConnell Creek and the Red Deer River to the south. As you can imagine, gazing over this area from the lofty and remote 3,333 meter summit of Cataract Peak in 2017 had Phil Richards and I planning another remote trip for several years afterwards. In 2018, we completed a massive 2-day trip into Mount McConnell, and the views once again whetted our appetites. Earlier in 2020, we completed our longest day trip to date, a 73-kilometer bike and scramble of Mount White and Grouse Peak. Seeing a fairly dry Boar Station Peak from Mount White cemented another trip. We were finally going to see what secrets the McConnell Creek Valley held. We left the Bighorn parking lot at 0800 and biked the familiar 14 kilometers up the ranch road to the eastern Banff border and Bison Gate. Within an hour, we were locking up the two-wheel steeds and marching up the old Cascade Fire Road into Canada's oldest national park. From the Bison Gate, we hiked 17 kilometers and many hours past the southward turn of the Fire Road where it crosses the Red Deer River and continued up the Red Deer River deeper and deeper into some of Banff's least traveled landscapes. Finally, we reached the confluence of the Red Deer River and McConnell Creek and started up its eastern banks into the valley, still far away at this point. As the clock turned into 1700 hours, we found ourselves at our planned west ascent gully leading up towards Boar Station, high above at this point. It wasn't with a lot of energy, but we made it to the lofty and rarely summited peak before returning to our packs and continuing to our planned camp for the next few nights. The 14-kilometer bike ride through the Tinda Ranch to the eastern Banff border hardly counts as part of the trip for us anymore. Mentally, we write it off as a prelude to any trips into this area of the Rockies. There are some uphill sections, but overall it's a pretty simple bike ride. It only took around an hour and we were already locking up the bikes and preparing for the long walk ahead. The sun was out and a cool west breeze kept the bugs and sweat at bay and made for extremely pleasant hiking up the Cascade Fire Road trail. After the easy Tyrrell Creek crossing, we continued our long march to McConnell Creek, passing the intersection of the Cascade Fire Road and Red Deer River Trail near the bridge leading to Snow Creek Summit. Yeah, it just kind of settles in.
Yeah. It's a little deep here. Maybe it's a little easier.
Yeah, I wonder that too.
Yeah, because that could easily get crotch deep. So I might just post it there.
We passed the faint trail leading north towards Divide Pass and Chirp Peak, and I was officially hiking on a section of trail that was new to me, my favorite kind of exploration. Nice. That is the way to Divide Pass. And this is the way to nowhere.
Looks easy, 45K.
There you go. It's a little shitty. The next section of trail was surprisingly unmaintained, and one should expect Blowdown, willows, and at least a few fierce stream crossings at McConnell and Drummond Creek from here on. Taking it out on the tree. It's already dead, Phil.
You will find out anything, Jesse.
By 13:30 hours, we were finally arriving at the feisty, noisy confluence of the Red Deer River and McConnell Creek. We were planning to hike up the eastern side of the drainage, hoping to find the old outfitter trail that Rick Collier's team found way back in 2000, but we weren't counting on it. It was a gorgeous afternoon as Phil led the way up the open banks of the wild, untamed McConnell Creek drainage towards a very distant-looking Boar Station Peak. Thankfully, the blowdown didn't last long, and soon we were back in open forest, following bits of animal trails. And then the miracle happened. We stumbled on very old cut logs with corresponding blaze marks cut into trees, indicating humans were here. Yes! The infamous outfitter trail that was already old 20 years ago was live and well, being kept open by animals and the odd human wandering up the creek. This was a huge game changer for our trip and a giant energy boost for tired minds and bodies. Stunning views over McConnell Creek lifted my spirits, and soon I was thinking I might just have the energy to tackle Boar Station today. We continued across the south drainage that Collier used in his ascent, and continued to our planned west drainage in open forest above the creek, no longer on a trail. Finally, at 5 p.m. we found ourselves in the west ascent gully to Boar Station Peak with a trickle of water cascading down it. The peak was almost a vertical kilometre above us at this point. I was pretty darn tired and honestly didn't know how I was going to do it. The south access gully was quick to ascend. Running water meant a refreshing source of energy along the way with no need to carry water. We made our way slowly up Dinner Plate, Shale and Scree to a helpful snow slope before Phil very kindly kicked steps to the upper southwest ridge. 2 hours after leaving the heavy packs, we were on the very remote summit of Boar Station Peak, with incredible evening views over a myriad of peaks, valleys, rivers, lakes, and ice fields. The location of Boar Station lends itself to some stunning views of Banff's and the upper Clearwater's most remote and elusive summits. Boar Station is higher than indicated on maps, soaring to at least 3,050 meters and over 10,000 feet, as many of the named and unnamed peaks in this area do. It was almost 8:30 by the time Phil and I returned to our waiting overnight packs and reluctantly started down the Boar Station ascent gully towards the northwest branch of McConnell Creek below. If I didn't have energy to ascend the peak 3.5 hours earlier, I certainly didn't have any extra energy now either. I was bagged. We crossed a very fast knee-deep creek before struggling up very steep slopes leading into our planned bivy valley. From Boar Station, we'd scoped a nice tarn as our target. Now we just had to get there. After crossing an open-ish meadow consisting of both bog and willows, we finally came to our little corner of paradise and found a suitable spot to camp. Unfortunately, the mosquitoes were ridiculously bad, and we retired to the tent quickly for a well-deserved rest. After a good night's sleep, Phil Richards and I left our camp and hiked up a series of gorgeous alpine benches towards the distant forms of Bellow and Howell Peak, far up the northwest Cataract Creek Valley. After descending the alpine bench, we hiked up a rocky drainage towards Bellow Peak, following rubble slopes to a high call before scrambling a southwest ridge to the uncairned summit. We returned down the southwest ridge and through the rubble field before continuing south and then northwest into Howell Peak's access valley. We chose a grass, scree, and boulder bench up towards Howell Peak before again scrambling a south-southwest ridge to its summit, which contained a dilapidated cairn. From the summit of Howell Peak, we returned to the lovely alpine meadows below, once again hiking a highline track past a beautiful alpine lake back to our camp at another scenic tarn. After sleeping in until 0700, we set off from camp, following a planned highline traverse along the western edge of the valley above the willows and bushes below. The next few hours were among the best hiking I've done in the Rockies. We were absolutely blown away at almost every turn by the sheer number and brilliance of the wildflowers and views off the traverse over the green valley and rushing streams below. The morning sun angled perfectly off the rolling terrain and made everything look exotic and lush.
Holds. You just gotta make sure that they're what you want them to be.
Finally, we rounded a corner in the moonscape below Bellow Peak and got our first views of the ascent options. The main question wasn't whether or not the ascent would go, it actually looked pretty easy. The question was whether or not our chosen slope actually hit the true summit or not. There wasn't much to do but start up and hope we were picking the right line, so that's what we did. From the col, we ascended steep scree to the summit ridge, where we were delighted to not only see we were on the highest point, but that there was no evidence of a cairn either. We were likely a first ascent, and for sure a first recorded ascent for Bellow Peak.
I don't see a cairn. Damn, son.
The views from the summit of the 3,060 meter peak were excellent in crisp, clear summer morning light.
This is the high point. Because you can't claim a first ascent if you don't get the high point.
We spent quite some time oogling some of Banff's and the upper Clearwater Ram River's more remote and obscure summits, including Mount Harris, Recondite, Simpson, Icefall, Mayman, Cheshire, and Welk. The wind was cold and we had another peak to bag, so we started the descent towards Howell Peak.
Yeah.
The traverse from Bellow to Howell's lower slopes was gorgeous, especially where clouds and sun and blue skies combined with sparkling tarns, grey rock, and green growth playing off each other as only nature can do. We approached the bottom of a very steep ascent ramp and started up on vegetated slopes, which soon started petering out. Once the vegetation ran out, we realized we were on a tilted table of rocks, each one threatening to come down when we did so much as breathe on it, never mind step on them. It was a delicate dance to the summit slopes from this point. The views from the cairn summit of Howell Peak were very similar to those on Bellow. Clouds and humidity had built up and took some of the crispness out of the photos. On our way down Howell Peak, Phil spotted something in a lingering snowbank in the valley far below. It was a bear den. We agreed to hike past it. Any residents would be long gone at this time of the year. Traversing the meadows back to our highline route was another magical experience. The flowers were out and the clouds lent a mystical quality to the landscape.
Other watches then went off.
The highline traverse was almost as good on return as approach much earlier in the day. The sun was higher now and the tarns were lit up brilliantly.
Is it?
Finally, almost 12 hours after leaving that morning, we were back at our bivy. Thanks to the horrendous bug situation, rather than enjoy a peaceful few hours at camp reading, we were kind of forced to go for an evening hike up to some lakes and tarns above our camp, despite feeling way too tired for such things.
So cool. It's just coming out of everywhere.
As we slowly hiked up to the largest tarn near the head of the valley under Bleat and Snort peaks, Phil suddenly backed up and gestured urgently at me. What was going on? A freshly killed goat just ahead, he whispered back. I'm reasonably sure that a grizzly must have stashed the body for later snacking, and I'm just glad we all avoided running into each other. My mind was full of the sights and smells of the day, and when Phil asked if that was rain on the tent, I dismissed it as likely being bugs hitting the outside of the tent. 10 minutes later I changed my mind. It was definitely raining. The rest of the night was a little more restless than the first one, with intermittent heavy rain dousing our little corner of the Rockies. Our exit day dawned mostly dry. At least there was no water coming from the sky anymore. We were glad to pack up camp without active rain, and by 0700 we were preparing to leave our little corner of paradise. Dressed head to toe in rain gear for the anticipated soaking wet willow-bashing ahead, we slowly picked our way down to the lake and made our way towards the distant Boar Station and McConnell Creek below. As usual, exit proved much easier and more straightforward than the approach had been. We ascended the west drainage on Boar Station to our traverse point and basically followed our GPS track and an assortment of animal trails back towards the open drainage and the Outfitters Trail.
Something.
That is ridiculous. Does it say happy birthday on it? Yes, it does.
Happy birthday, motherfuckers! One of the most remote valleys.
What
in the park.
hell?
At least the mud's nice and wet and soft.
Yeah. Oh yeah. By around 11:15, 4 hours after leaving our bivvy, we were delighted to be back on the Red Deer River Trail. The next 4.5 hours and 17 kilometers of hiking were spent under a mix of sun and cloud, with rain and T-storms threatening but never actually hitting us. We moved quickly down the trail, hoping to beat any storms that were obviously busy hammering the valley we'd just come from and further to the west. We arrived at the bike just before 1600 hours, and Phil set a furious pace across the Tinda Ranch, desperately outrunning storm clouds pouring through the Warden Rock Gap behind us. Despite a few showers and some strong winds, we managed to beat any major storms and biked into the Bighorn parking lot only around 45 minutes from the Banff border. It's hard to put this trip into a trite summary. There was simply way too much going on to do it justice with a few simple sentences. There was exhaustion, bugs, bushwhacking, route finding, and willows, but there was also wildflowers, roaring creeks, endless meadows, soaring summits, and exhilarating hiking through a special Rockies landscape that very few have trod before. Maybe I'll just leave it at that. After returning from our trip, Phil did some digging into trails up McConnell Creek and came up with something pretty darn interesting. On the third or fourth page of a Google search, he discovered an article from 1985 detailing a trip into the area by a group of park wardens to commemorate 6 wardens who'd lost their lives in the line of duty in the 100 years of the park system. What really made this trip interesting was the method of their commemoration, the proposed naming of 6 previously unclimbed and unnamed summits as in the displayed map. The proposed names never seem to have taken hold, despite all the summits being climbed and registers being placed by the group. Phil asked around and tried to resurrect some interest, but it never took hold, which is too bad.